Hi, everyone. I'm going to do a quick and dirty intro. I'm Ingrid Schroeder. I'm the director of the AA, and I think tonight is a fantastic opportunity to bring two exhibitions together, but also a group of people who have a collision of interests that I think are particularly important to the school. The two exhibitions that are on at the moment, one in the gallery in the more conventional manner and the other upstairs in the front members' room, both represent both an initiative of the school, but also a willingness to start to really show staff-related work in the front members' room, student-related work in the bar, and to start to think about how the themes and preoccupations that are present within the school are resonant with the kinds of things that we exhibit from outside of the school. Now, the way in which this then comes together is very much in support of a new program that will be launching for admissions in the autumn, which at the moment, and I think will continue to be called Existing Things of Relative Value, which will be a new postgraduate program. It strikes me that once upon a time there was a conservation course here at the AA that was extremely popular and very successful that slowly fizzled out. But this question of what we conserve is not so much about history as about how we value the things around us. And so the course will be launched to begin to blur the boundary between, say, the cathedral in the car park, the object to the urban. And we'll begin to build connections and to, again, question what we value, what we retain, what we reuse, what we embellish. And I think that this is a perfect introduction to some of those themes in that it brings together an international practice, not necessarily just a Western European practice, with, again, questions that are so resonant with everything that we are finding critically important at this very moment. So I hope that this is the beginning of a longer conversation. I hope you enjoy the conversation tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jane Hall for the further introductions. But thank you so much for joining us.
Am I using these? Yeah, okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I've been kindly invited to chair this evening. My name's Jane. I'm a member of Assemble, the architecture collective based here in London. I've been lucky enough to teach a third year history and theory course on gender and architecture. So I'm really interested to see how maybe some of the ideas that we discussed tonight kind of overlap with themes that I know are kind of percolating in the school at the moment. I'm going to start by introducing our four presenters today, and then let them kind of take over and we'll go through the presentations. So, starting with Noemí Blager here. Noemí is an architect and curator from Buenos Aires. She's worked in Barcelona and then moved to London in 1994. And you haven't put it in here, Noemí, but you're a consultant for the building and design industries as the head of a slate company. Is that right? Which I think is so cool. And then works as a practicing architect in 2006. During a project in Brazil, Noemí discovered the legacy of Italo-Brazilian architect Lina Bo Bardi. Inspired by the social dimension of Lina's work, Noemí mounted the exhibition Lina Bo Bardi Together, which opened at the British Council in London in 2012 and went on to tour internationally. In 2020, she published a book, Lina Bo Bardi Together, and this was actually a collaboration with Assemble. So we've known Noemí for a very long time and really value her support. As a former acting director of the Architecture Foundation and member of the Design Museum's curatorial board, Noemí became co-director of the 2014 London Festival of Architecture. She's a regular guest lecturer and critic at Harvard Graduate School of Design, IIT Chicago, here at the AA, the RCA, and the CAS in London. So everyone, welcome Noemí. I'm going to carry on. But we'll do individual claps because it's nice. So this is Arne van der Kapel. Arne holds a master's degree in engineering and architecture from Ghent University. He has been active at Rotor since 2018, joined Ghent University as a scientific collaborator in 2022, and has co-taught several design studios at the AA in London. With Rotor, Arne has worked on multiple design and consultancy projects and has been the main coordinator for opalis.eu, an online directory of reclamation dealers. since 2019. He has written several articles for academic journals and industry publications on reuse and the reclamation sector. Welcome, Arne. Arne is going to be joined by James Westcott, who teaches Diploma 18 at the AA, focusing on material reuse. He also teaches a seminar on convivial conservation, is editor of Ad Hoc Baroque, backed The Office, and worked at AMO. I practiced that earlier because I knew that was going to trick me. In the Netherlands, where he edited the Remcool House AMO books, Countryside, a Report, Elements of Architecture, and Project Japan. He's author of When Marina Abramovich Dies, a biography. Welcome, James. And finally, Tom Raymond. Tom is an AA tutor in environment and technical studies and a founding member of the AA Low Carbon Group. He is an architect and director of arboreal architecture, a practice that innovates ecological design principles in both technical performance and sense experience of human habitats. He studied at the AA and worked with Eric Owen Moss Architects in Los Angeles and Asymptote in New York before co-founding his own practice in London. He is an associate fellow of the Higher Education Academy and has also taught at Westminster University and Central St. Martin's. Welcome, Tom. So I think we have 4 presentations in total, which I think will take us about an hour, and then there'll be a time for kind of questions amongst the panel, which we'll kind of extend to the audience. So Noemí, I think you're first up.
Thank you, Jane, for the intro and for revealing things I did not reveal in my bio. And thank you to all of you for being here today and to the AA for organizing this event. And I also have to thank, ARPR for having supported a lot with little, the exhibition in the gallery that hopefully most of you will have seen or will see. Tomorrow is the last day. So let me start with this. As everybody knows very well here, we are living a very serious climate crisis, and the building industry, as you know, is responsible for nearly 40% of the global carbon emissions, which means that as architects, we have a crucial responsibility to address this issue not just with words, but with actions, with our practice. So we need to find new ways, new strategies to do more sustainable architecture that responds to the specific needs of a place, that working with local materials, with local resources, both material and human, and understanding the social fabric of a place, its culture, its climate, and its economy. So the exhibition next door tries to throw light on a new architecture movement that is evolving in an organic and decentralized manner as a response to the climate emergency. It's a movement that is gradually gathering pace in diverse corners of the globe and is driven not by style, but by social need, making projects in a responsible, ethical way, caring for the future of our planet. And we need to bring along in this process, to join the movement, developers, manufacturers, policymakers, and other stakeholders. We need to work all together. So I'd argue that this is probably the first architecture movement driven by social need that also delivers good architecture since the modern movement. And which is why it's quite important, it's very important now. So all the architects featured in A Lot with Little share a common mindset, which is over overcoming lack of resources with creative ingenuity. So as the subject today is reuse, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you very briefly 3 different housing projects that work with reuse in different ways. So, let me see. Yes, new building with salvaged materials, old building with new materials, and an existing building with an added extension. These are, I'll start with the first one, which is in Abu House in Asunción del Paraguay by Gabinete de Arquitectura. For those of you who are not very familiar where Paraguay is, it is a landlocked country in between south of Brazil and north of Argentina. And it has very mild winters, but extremely high temperatures in the summer, up to 45 degrees, and now even more than that with global warming. So this is a house that is for families, a private home, and it has an open plan ground floor, and this timber enclosure that you see on the right opens, as you see here, and this is the back of the house. That was the front. This is the back of the house, and they open in order to allow fresh air to circulate. You know, in this part of the world, we would be looking for sunlight. Here, we want shade in Paraguay. So, this is the upper level where the bedrooms are. And again, to manage the weather, the temperature, it's a floor-to-ceiling height of 5 meters and low windows to generate fresh circulation of air. So it's very, very much, obviously, very focused on dealing and resolving the weather, the high temperature issue. But I think that the most interesting thing of Solano Benitez's projects is his approach in the materiality. He sees architecture as a way of not just to create better buildings, but to create improvements in society. So his approach is a very holistic one. He creates, develops designs that can adapt to the local labor available. Paraguay is not a very highly industrialized country, so there's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of labor that have very basic skills, and bricks are probably the cheapest material in Paraguay, which he uses for walls, ceilings, partitions of all kinds, floors, and he basically uses creating a great expression with this just one material. But also he has developed a method, a program of waste management by which he uses a lot of recycled materials from demolitions, like this glass door, which he makes this patchwork of glass elements, recycled glass, put together by these metal frames. And of course, this kind of work requires a lot of labor, but that's the thing. He makes a balance of how much to invest in materials and how much in labor. And by giving new jobs to people who need them, then it's a good way of not just creating very good architecture, but also to make a contribution to society. So that's, and he would have exactly the same approach for this family home, which is not of a very high budget, but he would do it for a much bigger kind of house with bigger budget. He would use exactly the same approach with materials. So the second project is Rotellenberg in Belgium by Jan de Wilde and Inge Wink. This is an old building that lived many lives and a rural house in a very beautiful part of Belgium that I think that the current occupants are the grandchildren of the original builders of this house. So they approached the architecture practice with a request to refurbish this home for their family, their young family, and but to do it with very, very limited resources. So they wanted, basically, the only possible way for them to do it was by doing it as a self-build, right? So the architects, they work together with them, making different models together and seeing how this is going to work. And they created like a mechano system that, with very unusual materials for a permanent construction. So they're using formworks for the floor, they're using acroprops for as permanent structure, which confuses all their friends because people who go and visit them think that this is all temporary, but it's not temporary. And the way they work is, the concept for the house is having like the external walls, the skin of the house is the summer house. And then they have it's like a winter house within the house. And they created these partitions, these glass panels with big sliding doors. That is the winter house, and that allows them for a more efficient heating system when it's winter. But they have the visual size, the visual extension to the external walls, and they in this intermediate space, it's thermal insulation, and at the same time, it's free space that is used for whatever the family needs at whatever time. So it's a very flexible space. You can see how this mechano system works. There are 2 levels above where the rooms are, the bedrooms are. And also this is building gradually. So the family, when they have money to buy the rest of the materials needed to finish, that will happen at their own pace. So, and it creates like a very interesting aesthetic. There is no embellishment here. There's a contrast between these new elements in the house and the contrast with the passing of time. So they leave things as they are. If they work, they function, they don't modify them. And the architects and the inhabitants of the house, they have become very good friends, which is not something that always happens between architects and clients. So it's an ongoing relationship, which is very, very, that talks about the success of this project. So, of course, some little embellishment there is in parts of the house. So this is our second project. And the third project is one that I'm sure that most of you know very well, which is the transformation of 530 dwellings by Lacaton Vassal and their colleagues, who I'm very bad at pronouncing surnames, so I won't. This is social housing. And this is what it was. These are 3 modernist social housing blocks of the 70s. And after the architects refused to demolish this, they proposed a new strategy. And this is in the process of that transformation. So what they did is they first created a kind of inventory of all the elements that are of very good quality in this building, in each unit. unit by unit and work from inside out. And so they decided to, they refurbished all the bathrooms, they created new lifts, they have new electrical installations, but the rest stayed the same. And everything, all the process of transformation happened with with people inhabiting these units, the whole building. So what they did, they put on the top very light structure of penthouses, and because this building has a fantastic views on Bordeaux. So this is one of these penthouses. And going back on the side, you can see all this extension that was plugged into the existing building. And it's like 3.80 meters that connects to all at each individual apartment. So this is one of the penthouses on the top, on the roof, where there was nothing. And this is the view from inside one of the lower apartments, from their living room to this extension, which is like a winter garden with also balcony. And what they did is they changed. These are all apartments that are south facing, and all the windows of all the bedrooms, not just the living room, have been changed to these big sliding doors, so that they all connect to this space, which is free space. It's not giving any particular role, and it works also as a thermal insulator, and at the same time as an extension for free use, and improving enormously the quality of these apartments. And also, what is important to mention is that the developers of these social housing blocks are fantastic, and it's always essential to have very good developers in this. And they managed to keep the rent of each of these units the same. Even though each unit gained like 50% of area, they managed to keep the monthly rent exactly the same. They also improved the ground floors and the public area of the whole area and of the complex, And there you can see the structure of this plugged-in extension. So this is this facade, and it managed, the way it was done allowed for the whole community to stay together, to not have to dramatically change their routes to go to work, schools, etc. And just putting up with a little bit of banging noises, but I'm sure that they could put up with all that. And there, behind that big cruise there in the back, is this Grand Park, which before it looked like a big wall. Now it's like many windows to the city. So I will leave you with this image, which is the before and after. This is one of the 3 blocks that they transformed. So just that. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation to everybody involved. Quite happy very happy to be here to talk about this book. So Ad Hoc Baroque documents the reuse architecture of Marcel Raymaekers. I'm quickly gonna start with a short overview of where does this come from. So in a sense, the book is a spin-off of our Opalis research. Opalis, it's already been mentioned, our website where we document reclamation dealers in Belgium as a way to, prove basically that reuse is possible already today. And in Belgium, the website is online since 2011. So most of these companies we know pretty well. We visited them quite a couple of times at this moment. And when we started comparing notes at a given time, we realized that there was one specific company in the province of Limburg called the Queen of the South, where there was something strange going on. So not only did the owners, not only did they see sort of passing some incredible materials through their stock, but also the husband of the couple, he said he was an architect instead of a reseller, even an artist. He apparently had some kind of an immense oeuvre hidden away in the province of Limburg that nobody knew about. Also, this is what the headquarters of the company looks like. I can tell you that that's not the regular reclamation company. So we were kind of looking for an opportunity to speak about reuse in a sort of more of a cultural way instead of logistical or technocratic as we've been doing for the past couple of years. So we applied for a cultural subsidy grant from the Flemish government, which we got so the work could start. We are very lucky that the main protagonist in the story, Marcel Raymaekers, is still alive. He's 90 years old. He's been active with his company from the 1950s to 2014, at which point he had to sell because of bankruptcy. But so the main methodology of behind the book is oral history. It's speaking with him and with a lot of his commissioners to sort of paste together the story. One of the first things that we learned is that, in fact, he's not an architect. He dropped out of architecture school, and because he thought it too boring, and also that the first 10 years of his production consisted of this sort of architecture. So quite, in a sense, banal or anonymous detached houses for the subdivisions. Second thing that we learned is that his the architecture that he started developing afterwards has nothing to do with being ecological. It's just sort of an antidote for this kind of architecture. So he got so bored of himself after producing these kinds of houses for 10 years that he wanted to, and also he developed a kind of unease with this sort of aesthetic that he wanted to do something radically different. And for him, working with second-hand materials was just the right way to do so. Then another thing that we learned quite quickly is that he is in fact not as unknown as we thought that he was. There have been more than 100 newspaper articles being written about him, but all in the popular press. In sort of the architectural press, he's absent. We found just these 3 pictures in one book from 1971. One architecture book from 1971 and no text. So the author of this book, and it's not just any author, it's the main architecture critic in Belgium at the time, seemingly struggled to find words to sort of describe what this architecture is about. So that for us became the main challenge of the book. Try to contextualize his work and explain as clearly as possible why we think that what he did is interesting. I have to say it's not sort of a neutral monograph. This is really Rotor looks at the work of Marcel Raymaekers, and the themes that we describe in the book are very much themes that are present in what we do as well. So we started obviously documenting as much of what he did. We visited 35 houses, and half of the book consists of these kinds of building sheets with amazing pictures by our 2 photographers, Anja Hellebout and Anthony de Meyre. And then a bit of attention, a short explanation about obviously the materials used, but also sort of the spatial qualities of what he did, because he's very much against modernist aesthetics, but the sort of spatial arrangement of his architecture is not unlike what other interesting modernist experiments. And then the heart of the book are the 4 chapters or essays that come after we show the projects. So in the first one, we explain the context in which this architecture has been possible. This map is quite central to the whole of the book, so it explains all the sites that were important for Raymaekers for his work. Geological and geographical throughout his entire oeuvre. And just to give 2 examples, this is from his early work. So in the 1960s and 70s, what you see at the right is a ship dismantling yard in the port of Antwerp. Today, that's an industry that's almost entirely left Western Europe, but at the time it was still quite common. And on the left, you see an extraction site along the river Meuse. I think it's the biggest river that runs through Belgium, where they extract sand and gravel for the production of concrete. So, and this is what Raymaekers, these are 2 examples of what he did with the materials. So what you see at the right is reclaimed ship steel that he then hammered with an artist friend to clad this doctor's office. And what you see on the left is are the leftovers of the extraction of gravel and sand. So they are called Meuse boulders. They are together with the gravel and the sand equally transported and deposited by the river, but they are way too big for the concrete industry to do anything with. And the sort of the sculpture on the left became the fireplace of the house that was then built around it afterwards. But what strikes most people is, of course, all of the building antiques that are present in what he did. And sort of from the 70s onwards, that's also what he started focusing on mostly. Again, not entirely a coincidence, because we've known in Belgium quite ruthless demolition campaigns in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Belgium got out of the Second World War quite okay. But according to the politicians, mostly liberal politicians active at the time, I mean, in a way, they sort of wanted to create room to modernize Belgium. There was this sort of, people were afraid that Belgium, being a small country, was not going to be able to keep up with the bigger countries around. So the result are scenes like this. And what's central to the 2nd chapter of the book is, and that's illustrated by the picture on the right, is sort of the ecosystems of reuse that Raymaekers was active in. So he was by far the only company active. There was a whole series of demolition contractors that provided him with materials, and also smaller companies around his company that were responsible for sort of the processing and the treatment of the materials that he then worked with. The picture on the right is used, so it comes from his own archive, and it's sort of a document of communication used by these demolition contractors to sort of bring across what kind of materials they have available at their demolition yards at the moment. This is from a nationally televised show where we see Raymaekers standing in front of a castle that's being demolished, and you see him live negotiating with the contractor on what materials to dismantle and which ones are not interesting. Also central to the 2nd chapter is the Queen of the South itself. So already showed this picture. This is the inside of his headquarters. As you see, it's not just a showroom of materials, but it's a bar. It served as a nightclub or as a jazz club at certain points during the existence of the company. And what this does is sort of, for Raymaekers, is to sort of how surrounding yourself with these sort of quite rich and ornamented building antiques can uplift one out of sort of the ordinary life of the middle class people that he usually constructed for into something else. So he himself often really posed as a sort of the lord of his castle, and with the message, of course, that if you use his materials to build your house with, you would equally become the lord of your own castle. 3rd chapter is about his design methods, and there is one quote that explain one quote by Raymaekers himself that explains it quite well. So for him, all of these materials are just building blocks, and that's really sort of the point of departure for his whole architecture. So he rarely draws, or he doesn't often make models. Most of it happens in his mind, and sort of all of the houses that he designs his houses as giant 3D sculptures that consist out of all of the different materials that he has at his stock. This is also where the title of the book comes from, so Ad Hoc Baroque. In fact, Charles Jenks theorized how Raymaekers worked. We didn't have to do it ourselves. He describes it quite beautifully. So his architecture is a combination of diverse subsystems that are recognizable as such, but that are put together with a very high degree of freedom. And I mean, that's where the Baroque comes from. His architecture is actually very extravagant. Small example to illustrate this. So this is the facade of a flower shop. The natural stone elements, they come from this facade. It's an Art Nouveau house that had to be demolished to make place for the parking lot of a hospital. And what Raymaekers does is, so he reuses all of the natural stone elements and he completely reshuffles them. So to go from a 3-story, 3-bay house to a 2-story, 4-bay house. And also typical for him, he thought that so the entablature of the original house were the most beautiful elements. So he brings them almost to eye level, so that people can appreciate them better. And the final chapter discusses how his buildings got built concretely. So what's interesting about Raymaekers is he's been active from 1950-60 to 2014, and this completely coincides with sort of the coming into existence and the extension of the welfare state in Belgium. And what typically happens in all welfare states is a rise of wages and a transformation from an economy based on blue-collar work to white-collar work. In the beginning, in 1960s, labor was still very cheap. So this is a picture from one of his early construction sites. And what you see, Limburg, the province where he was active, was a mining province. So there was an abundance of cheap labor and also very skilled labor. So what you see on the right are miners that are constructing the venue for their own marching band. But then throughout his career, the sort of cost of labor became an issue that he had to deal with consistently. And one of the ways in which he does so is by mobilizing his clients as DIYers. These are pictures of a family that dismantled themselves a former slaughterhouse as a source of bricks and roof tiles for their own house. And these are pictures of a family that did the same with another building and then also proceeded to construct their own house with these materials. That's a process that lasted them more than 10 years. But what's also, these kind of projects are also quite present in his oeuvre. So this has been built for a very rich client, and in a way, and he had quite a lot of them, rich clients. And there is obviously the sort of the implied labor of this kind of architecture on top of the fact that all the building antiques are so prominently present that attracts this kind of that has attracted this kind of clientele for Raymaekers. This is, not easy to make fun of, but I think sort of if we achieved with the book, with our book, that people at least understand where this comes from, then we're quite happy.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, I'll just add a little coda to what Anna has talked about. And in doing so, I tried to make a connection to an aspect of the situation in the UK right now. So as an outsider, my access point to Belgian residential architecture was a website or a feed that you're probably familiar with, Ugly Belgian Houses. And it documents the idiosyncratic forms of expression that you get in rural and suburban Belgium. It's funny, but it's also definitely a guilty pleasure because it's clearly an elitist urbanite's perspective on what apparently is going wrong when you give people the keys, to design and take control over the construction of their own house. So there's a huge snobbishness in it, and the aggregator of but I do still find it funny, of course. The aggregator of the website says it's a snapshot of the chaos called Belgium, but certain typologies and styles do become obvious as you scroll through. So turrets and towers, suburban deconstructivism, windowlessness, and the castle typology. And then, surprise, surprise, Marcel Raymaekers also shows up on ugly Belgian houses. But the point is that this obsession with so-called ugliness is a trivialization of something that much more important and historically rooted that's able to happen in Belgium that isn't happening in the UK, and it's a real problem. So there's clearly a culture of not exactly self-building, but at least taking real ownership and pride over directing the design of your house and working closely with a contractor to realize a vision that's personal. And that's something that's very difficult in the UK to do and only accessible to a privileged few. So yeah, this ugly Belgian house became the cover of our book. Yeah, and it's related to this kind of 70-year, at least it was enshrined in legislation after the Second World War. The Thai law, he was the politician that brought in these laws that incentivized and subsidized people to kind of buy their own plot of land, buy the materials, work with a designer, and realize something that was individual to them. Whereas in the UK and much else of Western Europe, that process was left to developers and to the state to build things en masse. So yeah, historically, Belgium has this culture of sort of self-reliance when it comes to building. And as much as we might laugh at some of the results, it's much more important to suspend questions of taste and realize the value of what's being expressed here. So for me, that was an important connection. And then pivoting to the situation in the UK, where it's very difficult or almost impossible to realize for yourself a house in the countryside. The only way you can do it through the National Planning Policy Framework, it sets a very high bar. So it has to be like exceptional, it has to contribute to the rural economy, it has to be extremely sustainable. All of these very difficult conditions to meet, which by definition exclude most people. REBA offers some advice to do it, so they're called paragraph 79 houses. And then certain kind of boutique architecture offices make a living by facilitating wealthy clients to build their paragraph 79 homes, which look like kind of elite boutique versions of ugly Belgian houses, you have to say. Another one of them here, according to Build It magazine, it only was given permission to be constructed after several revisions and rounds, not with an individual builder, but with a developer called Scandiohus. And it was given permission because it references traditional styles and materials from the Sussex countryside. But note again that it was built by Scandiohus. So the strange contradictions that arise from policies that are apparently there to protect tradition or to foster innovation and so-called sustainability. This is a paragraph 79 house that was allowed to be built in the Dartmoor National Park because it apparently uses local materials like a lot of glass and I can't imagine how marooned one would feel sitting on that sofa in that oceanic patio. So yeah, questions of taste are obviously difficult and flexible and should maybe be suspended. And that's why in the unit that we teach at the AA Diploma 18, and Anna has been a central part of it as well. This year we decided to look at not the paragraph 79 houses are obviously the exception. They're a tiny sliver of what is actually being built, and what is being built is houses like these. We call them rural housing developments because of the lack of any other kind of name. So they're being bolted onto villages and towns in the countryside throughout the UK at the moment. Like, this is by far the mass of house building that's happening. And they come with traditional names and huge footprints and a narrow range of houses that people can choose from. And they're often built on greenbelt areas. This one just outside of Oxford. This is the developer's pattern book. All the options come with very kind of stately, reassuring, profound, solid-sounding names. One of the students in our unit, Anushka Ladani, chose to have a sort of generous attitude towards it and figure out connections with the arts and crafts movement, at least features of that movement that they were trying to reference. But of course, when it's done en masse by a volume house builder, it becomes not decentralized or individualistic like arts and crafts movement was trying to achieve, but it becomes the complete opposite. Another student in our unit, Jingqi Miao, decided to focus her project on these fake chimneys that are a planning requirement in a lot of places to reference tradition. They're made of glass reinforced plastic. They're entirely fake. There's no chimney shaft. There are no fires inside these houses. So again, this fixation with tradition, while a select group of 9 house builders can really rake in a lot of money. So our first task in the unit this year was to try to map where these RHDs are being built. And there's a lot of them. This probably isn't even all of them. And they were brave enough to go out into the field and try to take them seriously as well and understand what people valued, or is it a question of that they're kind of last resort and there's no alternative but to live in these suburban situations. And then very early in the year of our studio, this article came out and it was like an epiphany. Ollie Wainwright kind of exposed, or at least exposed the work of people who are exposing how shoddy these houses are. So this is the situation we're in, and it's going to continue when Labour government comes in. They're also committed to building 300,000 new houses a year, which is the same target that the Tories recently abandoned. But even the Telegraph thinks that this is a wrong approach to solving the housing crisis. In our jury last week, we were lucky enough to have this guy, Nick Bano. He's a barrister who represents tenants being screwed over by their landlords. And he's identifying how the housing crisis in the UK is not a crisis of supply, it's a crisis of cost. Every single piece of legislation, even the legislation that tries to make housing more affordable and accessible, like, oh, there's going to be a stamp duty holiday, well, that's just going to drive up prices even more. And the fundamental issue is that there's no rigorous system of rent control, so landlords are free to just continually increase the rent. So it's a crisis of cost, not supply, and if we could grasp that fact, then maybe we wouldn't have to build houses like this. So this is kind of the knotty problem that we're approaching in our unit this year. And from the beginning of Diploma 18, working with Rotor, we've been trying to expand Aparlis to the UK. So students have been visiting salvage yards and trying to identify how a culture of reuse is really deep and generational and ingrained. And these places have existed forever with no consciousness of or need to connect with modern notions of circularity or anything like this. And it's not that we're saying this is the solution to everything, but it's surely a more healthy attitude towards materials, context, and history. And as we've been seeing in everyone's presentations, it definitely leads to much more interesting designs. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I hope you're all sticking with us through this eclectic evening. And one more topic to add to your consideration. I'm not quite sure what the X means with a little X Ad Hoc Baroque, but I'm going to add another X Architectural Association Low Carbon Project. And this is a project that was started 2 years ago in the AA by myself, Kieran, sitting here, and a couple of other colleagues from the Environment and Technical Studies courses here at the AA. And we wanted to understand the relationship between the AA as a whole and the incredible change in the concentration of CO2 in the global atmosphere. In just one generation, we have shot above this curve, above this line. We haven't seen concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere like this for 900,000 years. And this is a new and critical relationship that we want to understand. And of course, we also felt, as you can imagine, a kind of twinge of hypocrisy as we were teaching at the school, talking about low carbon design strategies, and yet not really understanding or having a sense of the direction of the buildings that we find ourselves in, or the organization and the school that we're part of. We wanted to practice what we teach. So we carried out quite a detailed carbon footprinting exercise that we started a couple of years ago, and took us about a year to understand all of the aspects of the AA, its buildings, its courses, its people, its activities. And we did that by looking at the spending records of everything that the AA buys, but also with interviews with staff and students in order to understand the kind of complete, or as they call it, system complete picture of the carbon footprint of the school. And we were supported by the school and by carbon expert Mike Berners-Lee and the building physicist company Greengage. And that concluded with, we added up a lot of little numbers, and surprise, surprise, we ended up with a big number that was 9,161 tons of CO2e, that means carbon dioxide and equivalent greenhouse gases, that the AA in all of its activities emits per year. Now, those kind of numbers are hard to imagine, so if you want a different way of visualizing that, you could put 989 cars parked in Bedford Square and put the engine on and let them idle there, and they would continue to emit carbon emissions at the same rate that the school does. Or if you prefer a more positive spin on it, you could compare it to Hook Park, the AA's woodland campus. And if we had 6.5 Hook Parks, we'd have 900 hectares of woodland, and those trees would be sequestering carbon from the atmosphere at the same rate. So all of this information is in a website, which I'll give you a link to, and hopefully some of you have already seen it. And it contains quite a fine-grained kind of breakdown of all of the emissions of the school. And you'll see, if you look through this, that there are quite clear patterns. Travel emerges as the biggest factor by far. And then the energy and emissions associated with the building itself, with electricity and gas use, and then our digital activities, administration, and materials. And you might have just noticed on the video there that the site is interactive. So it contains sliders in certain areas where you can have a look at the effects of making a change to the school and get a sense of the kind of relative scale of those effects. So please point your phone at that QR code or take a note of our website. The top one is the standalone site. The bottom one is the second one is saying that if you go to the AA Schools website, you can go to the climate section that's now on the school's site, and you can reach us that way. So the second purpose of our work, now that we understand the emissions of the school, is to start to gather ideas, to promote and implement changes at the school that can start to bring down that carbon footprint. But not just to bring it down, also to improve the quality of the life, of the education here at the school, and particularly the the levels of climate literacy and the kind of discussions that we're able to have about the climate and our relationship to it through our architecture. So we're looking for wins, win-wins, win-win-wins. Please, through the website, you can email us and let us know any ideas that you have or how you would like to see the school change, both in the short term or indeed in the much longer term. So we have these two goals, both the ecological and the pedagogical, and perhaps we should also try to put those in context. So if these are the emissions of the school per year, we might imagine 109 students graduating from the diploma school this year. They're going to go into practice, we might hope, and I'm sure will work on a very wide range of different projects. But it's quite possible that in the decisions that we make in practice, each person might make a plus or minus difference of something like 100 tons of carbon to the projects that they work on. And so perhaps it's interesting to note that there's a kind of similarity of scale between the annual emissions of the AA as a whole and the decisions that we make in architectural practice. So I think I'll move on to talk about, or try to make some connections, of course, between the work of AALC and the exhibitions that we've seen. And it's clear that waste and reduction of waste, or perhaps we might even call it thriftiness as a kind of practice, is an important part of all of these things. And I think I'd like to frame it slightly differently than perhaps the other two, which is to say that waste, I think it's important to see that there's no waste in nature or no waste in natural systems. And that, it may be an oversimplification perhaps, but it's telling us that circularity as a principle is not just something that can help us reduce landfill, it's something that can help us to build and live in connection with and within the natural systems of this planet. And that surely is the essential step that our culture and our building culture needs to make in order to have any kind of lasting future. And so mostly, I think it's a little unfortunate that we talk about building waste and we picture stuff, we picture materials, bits of plasterboard going into the ground. Not that that's not important, but that I think we equally need to see that the same kind of linear thinking results in us dumping carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the air, into the sky. So perhaps it's a bit clunky, but when you think of a landfill site, I think we should also be thinking of skyfill sites. And the fact that we're continuously dumping things that we don't need into the atmosphere, as well as into the ground. So in being asked to introduce the AA Low Carbon Project and connect to the work of in the two exhibitions, I had an opportunity to wonder what would some of the work, what would some of the approaches of indeed our dear Marcel Raymaekers, who I've now come to love after reading much of the book, and indeed many of the other architects in the A Lot with Little exhibition, what would they make of the AA's future and of our practices in relationship to carbon emissions? Well, forgive me, because I couldn't help but enjoy the radical reuse aspects that Marcel inspired. So let's imagine a future scenario in which the conservation lobbies and the forces of the climate crisis have in fact formed some kind of truce, and maybe even an alignment that allows radical retrofit of buildings to take off across London, even across the UK. What a future that could be. And how much would be at stake, in fact, if the AA could be at the vanguard of this kind of transformation? This is an architectural school with a global audience. This is a Grade 1 listed building in the centre of London. Everyone would be watching. And if we can solve the kind of conservation and climate needs, then anyone could follow that lead. And it could happen from a top-down, kind of large project approach, or bottom-up, or both, through the work of students and tutors engaging with the fabric of our buildings. We could be building new thermal linings to our cold, leaky rooms. We could be experimenting with new materials and making ourselves. And we're going to need a very different approach to ways of engaging and sourcing our materials. We already have a fantastic fledgling organization, Material Arcade, which I expect many of you are aware of. But what if the Material Arcade, which reclaims materials for students' reuse, and there's a picture of the shelves that they have on the left there, what if that could operate at the scale of something like Queen of the South? And it's not just reusing materials that I think we need to engage with, but also procurement of materials to the school more generally. I imagine a future with a kind of general store, a kind of bringing together of the workshops and other parts of the school that procure materials, so that we can actually have a single source that is really looking for the highest quality, lowest carbon materials for students, and then, of course, could equally open to the general public. And we need circularity happening in the school itself. I imagine as 3D printed models might be no longer in use, they could be reprocessed on site into new feedstock, and that we can then use them for digital fabrication. We might close the loops of circularity in our own building, in our own processes of making. And I think that idea, a kind of concept of taking things in-house, which in a way relates to the kind of DIY mentality, is an opportunity to gain control over things that are otherwise out of our control, and we're not really aware, or becomes hard to track down, or even deliberately obfuscated as to what their climate impacts actually are. And we imagine the rapid growth of activities that are already taking place at the AA, such as here collecting wood from Hook Park, or it could be clay, and the rapid development of our knowledge and skills of working with biogenic construction materials. So I'll leave you with this quote from Arne Næss, which I think expresses the idea that actually all of us in this room, all of the projects in both of the exhibitions, we all have a place on the path to the future that we're trying to reach. But if we're going to get there, we're really going to need to engage with the cold, hard numbers of the climate crisis and not be paralyzed or dismissive of them, but we're going to need to respond with creativity, joy, innovation, and collective action. After all, this is a once in 900,000 year opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Really, in a way, like very different presentations, but I think all kind of also very entertaining and with a lot of kind of commonalities. And maybe we can explore some of those and the differences. I'm going to kind of start with a couple of questions. And if you have questions for each other, that would be great. And then we'll kind of open to the floor. So what I think, I've got quite a few things to tick off, but what strikes me as really kind of important to all the presentations is the role of imagination, which I think Tommy really kind of emphasized towards the end, but also the importance of narrative, right? And you've got this amazing book which really centers Raymaekers as a personality, right? The biography of this individual. And Noemi's films really kind of, I think, interestingly have the architects kind of talking to their projects, and it's a methodology and a kind of whole career that is behind these projects. These are not often one-offs for those individuals. Yet the words like counterculture, decentralization, movement were also mentioned. So do we need these shamans to kind of lead us on this journey? And how do we make it a kind of collective endeavor? What are the roles of imagination and narrative to the work that you're doing?
Who do you want to put that to?
Well, maybe Noemi, you could start, because your project is so central, and I think you really take us around the world. So maybe you could kind of speak to some of those lenses.
I think that it's quite interesting how going around the world, you find a lot of architects working in the right way, right? Being with climate literacy, but that is very important. Understanding what supply chain, understanding the impact that the building industry has, not only on the environment, but society, and how we can help both things improve the general conditions of our industry. And I think that, and because this is, as I think I mentioned before, not driven by style, because we had many periods where they were very much stylistically led, or trying to catch up with what the technology could do. We went parametricism and what can be achieved, etc. So it's quite. I think one of the interesting things of this, what I call this new movement, is that it is decentralized. Therefore, each country, each practice, but it should be more by culturally driven or climatically driven, not sure, develops their own work. But they all have commonalities. They all have the same approach. Is leadership needed? I think that in education is needed. I think that the key is how architecture is taught, how we gain more climate literacy, understand supply chain, and there are many aspects of our industry that seem to be how we can fight with reality, what you were talking about, what's happening in the UK. And, the truth is that architecture and the construction industry is mainly driven by profit. And there is a very heavy, there's all the policy makers, it's a very difficult body to move and to make more agile. I'm very impressed with people like Assemble, who are managing to disrupt the ways in which architecture is being produced. So I don't have quite an action. I'm a specific answer to that, but I am very enthusiastic to see that there are lots of different practices that are popping up in very different parts of the world.
I'll make a short point about imagination, because I think counting carbon could be very boring. And being told that you're doing it wrong and that you're unethical and shameful for whatever you might have done today to get here or eat something or drink something is also extremely boring. And imagination is therefore absolutely critical, because the point of all of these numbers is not shame, and it's not to get stuck in the spreadsheets. It's to actually to form a relationship between something that's invisible, the sky, its emissions, the carbon in it, and ourselves. And it's to form a relationship that we can then actually have a lot of fun thinking about what we might do differently, because we now understand that relationship. But we certainly have to make sure that we don't end up getting stuck in the numbers and the guilt.
One of the central notions of the first chapter of the book is this notion of, I think we called it the modern industrial framework, sort of how industry developed in an ever more liberal and globalized world. And one of the things that became, very clear by looking at Raymaekers, but it's also clear by whatever Rotor tries to do on a daily basis, is that all of the tools that we have that sort of support the process of construction today have developed together with the modern industrial framework. So, I mean, it's clear that this modern industrial framework is sort of completely incapable of changing direction. But the tools that we have are very closely linked, I mean, are sort of supportive of this system. And sort of the space that exists outside of the modern industrial framework is super limited. Raymaekers was active in it, but he wasn't afraid to break the law. I mean, he often operated in sort of the gray areas of what was legally possible. Sometimes he just went over the line completely.
Is that a tip for students at the AA?
So, I mean, he created, in a sense, the conditions for himself to be able to operate in. And I do think that... to come back to your question, that notions like decentralization and counterculture are indeed essential in moving forward, just because of the fact that it also points towards sort of the margins of the sort of the giant framework where we operate in, and that it seems to be indeed there that change is much more easy than within the framework itself.
Yeah, and maybe I could. Oh, sorry, Noemí, do you want to?
One thing that I would like to add, I think it's a question of scale as well, because one thing is to be able to disrupt. So, for instance, the house or the underbuilding. I remember asking them, how do you deal with regulations, etc. Or I asked the same question to the Spanish architect, Toral, and at certain scale, you can deal by doing interpretations and working with that. But one thing is to do a house, and another thing is to work at a very large urban scale. So it's very difficult, it's tricky.
And I was very struck in all of the projects about the kind of orientation towards materiality, right? This is a kind of conversation about carbon, as Tom highlights, the kind of intangibility and invisibility of that, but how central the projects really remind us of the kind of poetics and joy that this conversation has. That's also a narrative that we don't hear enough. And actually, in moving away from, say, the numbers, the kind of quantitative element, and thinking about the qualitative opportunities, and expression, artistic expression in Raymaekers' work. I think the kind of hilarity of the Instagram posts and different new forms of communication, but then tying it really deeply to the policy is interesting. And whether you could each kind of maybe speak to the role of this idea of the poetics and soul that this carbon conversation has.
Yeah, it's true that I mean, I think Raymaekers really has a point when he says that sort of him moving away from plans and building specifications and whatever was sort of liberating for him. In the sense that when he starts from, so by not being bothered about that at all, so what he puts central again is the material indeed. And one of the most fascinating things for us to see when we worked on the book is sort of the completely new aesthetic that is created when a material is put central, or when the creative process starts from a material instead of from a piece of paper. And in that sense, I mean, that's really a plea for creativity and for architectural education, and allowing this kind of creativity to exist in architectural education, because, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, in the end, it's engaging with the numbers as well, but then starting from the material makes it a lot of fun, I'd say.
Yeah, humor seems to be an interesting element.
Yeah, but you know, creativity always flourishes with strict boundaries around it as well. So it's really interesting that in a situation of frugality and thriftiness forces more imagination. And going back to your first question, I don't think we need the gurus at all. It's just that, you know, we weren't completely interested in Raymaekers as a person, but more just for what he did and for what it points to today. I think it's about, and with creativity as well, it's about, like, can we find ways to decentralize and undo regulations or systems that are stifling us? And like, just lifting the lid off will be enough, you know. I don't know that we need to get too preoccupied with poetics or anything like that, but just imagine where we had more freedom of movement around certain things, and yeah, particularly materials, I guess.
Do any of you have sort of questions for each other that you're burning to ask before we invite the audience to participate?
I'm interested in your definition of it as a movement, Noemí. Can you talk more about that? And yeah, go on.
I have to say that I'm from Argentina. So I grew up in a world of uncertainty and where people had to do a lot with little, right? And lack of resources, and always thinking outside the box. And I think that there was a time going to different Venice biennales, right? Doing our carbon footprint, emissions, by going to Venice and Venice many times. Came to a point where I really got very tired to see, what was, everybody from all parts of the world coming to one place to see what other parts of the world are doing, and when many were doing similar things and trying to promote similar things. And I think that it's crazy in the world we live in, because obviously we need to have local responses. We need to understand not only in terms of materials, in terms of how society is organized, in terms of the economy, so many aspects, cultural aspects that are key to how these things evolve. So I think that I remember when I was studying architecture, we were always looking at what Europe was doing, right? And we were trying to do those things. And actually, when we were filming in Africa, in Niger and in the north of Kenya, we were told the same thing there. They wanted to do things in a Western way, but that didn't work, doesn't work with the conditions there in any way. So starting to see that, so I started exploring where there is that kind of confidence and independence to do their own thing, and to not be looking at somebody else's identity, but see what can be done in the best way with what we have. And I started finding that there were many locations in the world where that is happening. But I was also interested to show in the exhibition, what the global north, which is the politically correct way of saying the rich countries, basically, where there is a very developed industry, how some people can disrupt that, and the work of Lacaton Vassal, of Young the Building Inc., your work, and I guess Rotor work too, and so how they are managing, and so it feels like a movement that does not have, when you talk with them, with the 10 different architect practices, they all start from the same principle, first doing a profound understanding of where they're working, and give a specific answer to that situation, and of course working with local materials and responding with whatever is necessary in each place. And it feels that if much more of that was happening, I think it's a movement. I think it's a movement that hopefully that it would be great if more joined. That's what I feel.
Can I just add to that? I thought another example of it as a movement was throughout many of the projects, there's quite a clear practices of what I would call passive environmental design strategies, which is local climatic responses. And it's heartening to see that instead of the modernist approach of giving up on the building's performance at creating an environment and solving it with a bunch of electrically powered boxes, the buildings are now trying to do the work of managing environmental conditions and finding that that's in fact incredibly playful, delightful, and conducive to really wonderful spaces. I found that as a common theme through many of the projects. On the other hand, I felt that the non-local issue, the dealing with the global issue of climate change and concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is actually still rather behind. I don't think any of the projects that I've seen put reducing CO2 emissions as like the primary design driver of any one of those projects. I think, and maybe I'm wrong. I'd be happy to hear if that's the case. And so that, in terms, there's also still apparently in a lot of projects an embodied carbon of a lot of concrete, a lot of glass, a lot of steel, a lot of brick, and that aspect of the movement, I think, is still has some way to go.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry. Did you look, so my colleague in Diploma 18, Odeline Doulier, made a really good point and wrote a short article about how everyone in the AA should close their shutters. Like the buildings are blessed with shutters and that's a really good insulator. Did you look at shutters and how much they would reduce their heating burden?
Yeah, so we've just started a list of 101 ideas to change the AA. I think we're at about 32. Too many of them have come from me.
Overflowing.
A few have come from others and a few from students. And we actually had a very nice meeting with the Student Forum a couple of weeks ago, and we've got another 20 or so ideas from students. And shutters is on there. I don't know, probably number 17 or something. It's on the list, and it's one of the ways in which, it's a very happy coincidence that Georgian architecture included beautiful shutters. We then proceeded to paint them over, and they're mostly stuck in the surrounds of the AA buildings. But we believe that a lot of them are there and could be unpainted and unfolded and reused as a thermal enclosure to shut the building at night, and it would bring that tradition of that somebody may welcome and enjoy or may not, of going around every building and closing the shutters at night and reopening them again in the morning.
Totally. Yeah. It's exciting.
Which in itself has a performance, which it's something maybe, Noemí, do you want to respond to Tom about the...
Well, basically, what I would say is that all the architects are... It's more of a common sense thing. And by following, for instance, the case of Niger, that project is planned looking at how in the area, the traditions of the area that were precisely as a response of the climate, the local climate. And I think that none of the architects puts sustainability as the target. They just want to build things properly, and by working, there's no measurement or target to say, okay, we have, no, let's use less of this or more of that or whatever. It's whatever is possible. I think it's a transition. We have to go through a transition. And for instance, Peristoral, the project in Cornelia in Barcelona, yes, they have to use concrete, but they reduced enormously the amount of concrete by using a lot with the geometry of the structure and using wood. So, I don't think that there are specific formulas. I think that each of them is responding with a kind of common sense way to do that. But targets, as in understanding, I think there is a lack of climate literacy. There are many things that are not perfect, but I think there is a way. It's a good route to that.
Which felt like a really strong aspect of the film, is really understanding and thinking about the power of architecture to affect a kind of cultural shift in how we build, which is then reinforced really by, I think, Rotor's work about really mapping the construction and waste streams from a much more kind of industry scale, economic point of view. And how do we start to then tie these two knowledge streams of knowledge together somehow. Tom? Or
I was just starting to feel bad that we've been.
We were going to go to the audio, exactly. I'm not perfectly positioned. Yep, we've got one question here.
Thanks. It's a question about bureaucracy. Not should architects pay tax, but more. There's a kind of sense from the presentation that it's kind of bureaucracy sort of standing in the way in a certain sense for sort of countercultural roots of some of the architecture, and we kind of enjoy the anarchy of it, of what results. But someone in the room will know how much of our global economy is circular, but particularly in this part of the world, it's very, very low, probably less than 5%. So there's a question of scale, and I was wondering what role bureaucracy plays in that kind of range from one end, a kind of architect standing on a site watching a building being demolished and thinking about how to reconstruct it without skipping the drawings, and at the other end, kind of material surveillance that we need to get materials where they need to be at the right time. We work with a lot of local authorities in London. It's very hard to, for example, make a case to make a space to store materials at scale. And in order to do that, you need to know what materials are coming in when, and there's a kind of bureaucratic process behind that. So there's a sort of range there that I think needs addressing, particularly in this part of the world, around how we, turn that 5% into, the other end of the scale. And in a sense, the rubbish getting built on the edge of Oxford is a sort of absence of bureaucracy as well, right? Because there's maybe one planning officer dealing with 4,000 homes, and so they have to deal with 6 house types because that's the only way they're going to get all the drawings. So there's that in the sense that there's a sort of anarchy and absence of bureaucracy. So what's the role of bureaucracy in say, London or the UK? You go.
No, I think that's definitely your question.
On the one hand, of course, we need more regulation. On the another hand, we need a lot less to liberate people to build themselves. I don't know. All I can think of, you say we need to know. We need to know to an extent, but I don't think we need to know to the extent that we think we need to know. Just this tendency towards optimization and precision, and we can't do anything until every brick is on the blockchain. Until then it's impossible. We can't consider scaling up reuse. So I feel like knowing and optimization and planning is often a sort of alibi for not actually acting. And it's first we need to build the system. So until then, sorry, nothing. So that's a tiny answer, or one thought at least. Arna's been thinking about scale a lot.
Yeah, no, I was going to go in a different direction. I was going to say what we do see lately in France, and to a lesser extent in Belgium as well, is that, for example, demolition permits are being refused more and more if there hasn't been a sincere effort in researching if the building can be maintained and adapted as it is. So, since we do live in a bureaucracy, I think, policy can be good policy can be super powerful as well. I think at the moment, I'm exaggerating a bit, but the only thing that stands in the way between a complete destruction and renewal of our urban fabric every, let's say, 50 years are heritage laws. So there is a good point that can be made is that heritage laws should be more extensive and not less. That they should grow, that they should integrate materials and materials on the level of the building element instead of just only entire buildings. So, but I think this comes back a little bit to sort of how, we need custom-made solutions, and there is a bit, that's quite difficult, sort of, finding a way in which bureaucracy at the same time is strongly present in the sense that we want it to be, but on the other hand allows for custom-made solutions on a project basis or even smaller. That's, I don't have the answer on that question, but I do think it's a very important point of attention for the coming years.
Great. We have a question there.
I've got more of an observation rather than a question, and perhaps maybe I can get some response on the back of that. But it feels that there is a kind of a lack of clear narrative of actually what's good and what's bad when you look at the building materials and what we kind of, the stuff that it's available to us to kind of pick and choose from. And I think only when you understand what it takes to produce that concrete, how much energy, what the resource depletion, the brick, how much energy, where it comes from, how it's dug, and only then you can kind of clearly see the bigger picture. And I think the problem right now is that neither academia nor the building industry really has that clear picture. I think that probably there are kind of glimpses of it in some areas, but there is no clear picture. And you can't move any way further than using stone for structural use because the material is already being cooked. So you just have to cut it and use it. Of course, you shouldn't transport it too far. Earth, which is unstabilized earth, which you can dig in the garden in Bedford Square and actually use it, mix it with straw and sand and make blocks and make buildings with it. Fibers, which you can mix with the earth to make various different materials, lighter blocks, insulation, etc., with the clay. And the timber. And it's all those four materials. That's what we've got. I mean, it's kind of, everything else is just kind of background noise that it's just distraction, basically. It's like, low carbon concrete, none of it actually stack up. And only when you go and see that in order to make the volume of bricks, you've got the clay depletion, but actually you need to burn, if you're actually using timber, you need to burn 1.5 the volume of the bricks to make in timber to make the bricks. So and then obviously you can use the timber in its own without doing the kind of the depletion of the clay, etc. So we lack, I guess, within both academia and then the construction industry, we lack that understanding. So once you understand that, and then you go to a new site and there is an existing building, then you'll be like, right, okay, so we purpose all this stuff, and then the new stuff will be either structural stone, either timber, either earth blocks, or either some kind of fiber kind of grown stuff that's mixed for insulation, etc., etc. And everything kind of stack up so clearly. And that's it. I mean, and of course, that comes to foundations, and of course, not having concrete for foundations, having concrete foundations, which again, obviously, concrete depletion of sound, etc., etc. So once you log those four, everything else kind of starts to make sense. And then it's a question of taking the client on board, taking the other consultants on board, and then the industry then starts to follow that kind of path. I think without that, we'll be lost. I think with just too much background noise, too much confusion.
Thanks for that point. I would add the fifth material being reused materials of any kind. Also fit that bill. But I think you're right. I think if it's not reused or it's not biogenic, whether you calculate it or not, it's going to have a high embodied carbon. That's the reality. And well, those are really fun materials to build with. let's get on with it. And let's promote that. Let's see how far we can take that. Let's see how we can do those things at scale. Let's promote the research and development of more highly performing materials or materials that become, that are able to replace glass or replace foundations or replace things that otherwise are actually very difficult to do biogenically. And, that's the future I see and I want to live in.
Yeah. Are there maybe one final last question over here?
First of all, thank you very much, everybody. Really inspiring and interesting talks. The films I thought were incredible, extraordinary exhibition. Thank you so much. My question is sort of two questions, which I think partly has been answered. The first one, which is, were there criteria, Noemí, that you applied to the architects? Was there were there architects, you don't have to say who, but who were rejected, perhaps, once you'd sort of looked at them more closely. And then a little bit related to that is whether, in fact, being part of this film or part of this exhibition, some of the architects have almost asked themselves more critically about whether they are building or making a lot with a little. So almost whether that sort of has generated self-reflection for those architects.
So I didn't understand what you were talking about, reject. I didn't understand that bit of...
Well, I just wonder whether there were architects who you had thought, we'll look at this building, or we'll find out more about that building, then actually decided that perhaps...
Many. I tried to put together a group of practices, most didn't even know of each other, whose whole body of work is consistent with in their approach. Not that in the last 10 years, we have to be more sustainable. We have to and change course, to a better way. So lots. I've been made lots of suggestions, and I couldn't find them working. And as I said, the criteria, because the reality of each of those each of those countries, most of the projects are done by architects who are from the place. Most, obviously, not in the case of disaster relief, Shigeru Ban, there was a project in Italy. But and with Francis Kere, he lives in Berlin, but he goes a lot to Burkina Faso, and this was a project in Kenya that we're showing because we couldn't film in Burkina Faso. But Kere is a very interesting case because he talks about, I asked him, the way he works in Burkina Faso, how he builds there, how he approaches his projects when they're in Europe, right? And he says exactly in the same way. And but of course, and to the question of bureaucracy, there are issues of insurance when you build that affect enormously the choices, and especially in second-hand materials, affect the choice of materials, because we have a very outdated, I think, set of regulations that don't consider a lot of the criteria that should be considered nowadays. I don't think it's easy. The industry is huge, and so there are many aspects, many bureaucratic aspects, and it's a whole ecology that's not very ecological of the construction system that needs to participate in this. We need a lot of collaboration from manufacturers. Working with second-hand materials requires more labor, and this is not always possible depending on which part of the world you are. So, and most of the times is not very sophisticated or very skilled labor that you need, right? But there's a whole set of elements and criteria that needs to come together. So, yes, I rejected lots of suggestions, and I try to remain quite orthodox, with the criteria, and always try to find projects that were doing more than just building more sustainable with a lower carbon footprint. None of these projects is net zero, none, right? But also projects that try to do something else, to use labor that is unemployed and try to improve the conditions, the living conditions of the people involved. Not only improve the lives of the people who are going to live in these buildings, but also of the people who work around it. So I think it's a whole season. That was the criteria to do all this. I know they are not perfect. I know that doesn't happen. It's not. But I think that it's that's why I call it a movement. I think that there is a strong intention And many of these practices sacrifice lots of things, lots of economical decisions, that would benefit them, but staying loyal to what they believe is the right thing to do in architecture.
Can I just make maybe a closing thing to focus our minds on? And the thing that stands out for me the most is that, and maybe you can put up the slide, the Paraguay house, the connection between that, the sort of diamond framework on the walls.
The brick partition.
Yeah, and for me, that's a kind of metonym of everything we're talking about, because it's frugal, it's ad hoc, it's incredibly clever, it's really simple, but it enables something that's very beautiful and functional as well, I guess, right? And it's probably against the rules, because I don't know how strong it is.
Are you talking
Yeah,
about
this one, exactly. I just feel like that's the kind of imagination we want to unleash.
I don't know if you saw the
There's a zoom in, I think, on the next slide, or the one before. Anyway.
No, this
Okay, we can see.
This is as zoomed in as.
Isn't that cool?
And if you saw the films, if not, you have another day to do. But there's FADA, the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Arts, that also by Solano Benitez. And what he does, he creates modules with bricks, triangular modules, that are put together by the maintenance staff of the university. So not even by bricklayers or people skilled in the building industry. And he creates these systems that, yes, they take a lot of labor, but not specialized labor, to create these massive, and he is incredibly knowledgeable about structure and how to make the most of the cheapest material, and how this works also as a parasol in the case of FADA, that massive structure. And yes, he is frugal. He's very frugal and very to the essentials.
I've also just realized that this is maybe really incriminating if this tiny thing is like a response to this enormous crisis. So there's a paradox there, and a really troubling one at the same time. But this kind of creativity feels super important.
Yeah.
One also short closing perhaps comment in relation to frugality and scarcity is that I think that is essential now, but I don't think it's part of the long-term picture. I think that ultimately in an architecture which becomes truly integrated with natural systems, then we can live with abundance. Because when the waste that we create is not toxic, when it's a positive ingredient to the next system, then these things can thrive. Then the turnover and throughput of them is just life. It's not a problem. It's not a contamination anymore. So I think there's an interesting point around frugality and scarcity and its value, and also the value potentially in the future of abundance that we may eventually reach.
Great. Well, on that note of abundance, I want to thank James, Tom, Noemí, and Anne for participating. And as Noemí says, the film is on for at least another day.
One more day.
But it's traveling worldwide,
yes.
So you may catch it in another location. And your exhibition upstairs is also.
And could you mention the book?
I was going to come on to the book, which presumably you can purchase from the AA bookshop. From here now.
There's a pop-up shop.
Oh, I was not informed of this. Yes, okay. Everyone rush over there immediately. So thank you for coming. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the AV.